Now this video may or may not have a clickbait title. I just wanted to see if it worked, to be honest, but you know, you can still stick around for the story. So this story aims to put one of those classic F1 myths to bed. You know, one of those ones you keep seeing repeated over and over again, time after time. It's up there with pole position being switched to the dirty side, Glock moved over for Hamilton, and Benetton having traction control. And this is the actual story of why Damon left Williams. So the clickbait title, if I use one, is technically correct. Now Damon's career, in a weird case of coincidence, mirrors that of his legendary father Graham. Both came into the sport relatively late, both of them won at least one world title, and both of them were there to pick up the pieces when their legendary teammate was killed. In fact, Damon was 30 when he got his first test driver gig for Williams in 1991, making him 31 when driving for Brabham before their bankruptcy in 1992, and then being 32 when he got his break at Williams to partner Alain Prost in 1993. This is all stuff that would be unthinkable today, no matter what your name is. Nico Prost wouldn't make it in Formula 1 now. Matthias Lauda certainly wouldn't make it. Mick Schumacher definitely wouldn't. That's Mick Schumacher as a 32-year-old man, not now. I'm well aware he's going to be driving in Formula 1 in 2021. Also, I'm going to have to put something pretty damn thick over the Venetian blinds. The lighting in here is awful again. Or I could just record at night time, but that's not fun. Williams was also the team to be part of in the early 90s. They were innovating, they had all the bright ideas, but they still needed to grab whatever talent they could to make sure the car won. Patrese and Boutsen in 1990 was a failure. Then Mansell came in for 1991 and then left for kart once he won the title in 1992. He was then replaced by three-time world champion Alain Prost, who had comprehensively beaten Mansell when they were teammates at Ferrari in 1990. And something I hadn't noticed until I was putting this script together is that each driver was replaced by a better driver. And that's opened up a can of worms saying that Prost is better than Mansell, but I'm going to stick by it. And I put a blanket over the blinds. I'm a genius. Looks much better now. Back to the story, when Prost retired at the end of 1993, Damon would be second to Senna for 1994. Well, that is until the Brazilian's untimely death at Imola that year. Damon still kept within about half a second of Senna in testing, but after the Brazilian's death at Imola, he had to step up in a huge way. Damon managed to do what his father had done in 1968 after Jim Clark had died at Hockenheim. Patrick Head said that he came to the factory and analysed every single piece of data they had with the team, as well as giving them all the information that he had, such as taking the wider line through Tamburello because of two specific bumps in the corner that unsettled the car too much for him. Despite having to now lead and keep the team together in the circumstances, Damon came within a whisker of winning the title. He outdrove Michael on merit at Suzuka, which not many could do, to be honest, and he would have clinched the title if not for a collision with Michael Schumacher in the final race at Adelaide. A collision he looks back on and says with hindsight he should have waited to get past the damaged car. He didn't know at the time, but, you know, hindsight. And he also managed to cause some friction with Frank and Patrick after a cock-up at Jerez that year, which resulted in him carrying too much fuel with which to chase down Michael and pass him. Damon had wanted to see what went wrong and to stop it happening again, like Mercedes does when stuff goes wrong, but despite being team leader on paper, Frank didn't regard him as such. And this was either out of mourning for Senna or they just didn't believe that Damon could be a number one driver. I mean, it was part of the reason they kept Nigel around in 1994. It's a bit like how James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich and Kirk Hammett hazed Jason Newsted when he first joined Metallica, and they treated him like he was just a hired hand because, well, he wasn't Cliff Burton. I mean, hot take, Jason was my preferred bass player out of the three. Oh yes, I went there. So moving into 1995, Damon had the chance to make amends for the previous year, but he and Williams kept having issues either on track or on the pit wall, and Schumacher went unopposed to the world title despite Damon winning 2 of the opening 3 races. Schumacher would actually go on to win 9 races that season, which matched Nigel Mansell's record from 1992. And tensions were further made higher when Williams refused to implement team orders to allow Damon past his teammate David Coulthard to allow Damon to get onto the back of Schumacher. Schumacher scored 102 points that year. Damon only managed to score 69. Nice. In his own words, Benetton ran rings around Williams. Damon's confidence crashed, because when he was good, but when he was off, he was awful. Losing out in 1994 seemed to have wrecked him, but in 1995, with a car capable of winning and losing by some distance to Schumacher, well, that destroyed him. And despite it all, he signed a one-year extension for 1996. But behind the scenes is where it all happened. Frank and Patrick could see what was going on and thought, well, if he's going to be like this all the time, then what's the point in even having him around? Because we can get someone younger, better, and cheaper than him who can get into the car, drive, and win. They'd already signed Jacques Villeneuve for 1996, and then they figured they could just have someone else to partner him for 1997 and beyond once he's figured out the car and the team. Williams could have easily sacked off Damon at the end of 1995 for poor performance and had someone else along with Villeneuve for 1996, but seeing how Benetton fared with two brand new drivers for that season, well, it was probably for the best that they didn't. It also has to be said, according to an article written at the time, is that Coulthard was the faster of the two drivers come the end of that season, but when he moved to McLaren in 1996 he was about a quarter of a second slower on average than new teammate Mika Hakkinen. But when he did move to McLaren, he still won 2 races for them before Mika did. Now obviously this is the 90s, this is pre-Twitter, pre-Facebook, pre-Instagram, pre-social media in general, but the rumours flying around in the paddock were almost like what you'd get from F1 blogs in the off-season to generate clicks. The biggest rumour of all being that it was Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Schumacher's teammate in the Sauber sports car programme, who would partner Villeneuve for 1997. Now it's a shame I can't find any of the other drivers who were linked at the time, but I'm assuming one of them would have been Jean-Christophe Bouillon because French driver, Renault engines, and I know Jason Plato tested briefly but he went into touring cars with Williams instead. Bouillon was setting competitive times against both Hill and Villeneuve in testing, which isn't usually a benchmark unless you're a Kubica fan, but Frank and Patrick were two people who would use testing times to evaluate drivers. I mean, it is after all how Plato got his Renault BTCC drive, because he beat both Bouillon and Morbidelli in a testing shootout. Others? I'm not sure. I mean, they didn't start courting Montoya until 1998, but there was an awful lot of talent on the other side of the Atlantic at the time in kart, and there still is, come to think of it, but if it was today, I mean, I bet Franchitti would have been linked because it's so out there it probably would have generated a few hundred clicks or so. So Damon went away after absolutely demolishing the field at Adelaide in 1995, and by demolish I mean he won by 2 full laps. God, wasn't F1 competitive back then? He came back fitter and in a better mindset, ready to grab 1996 by the horns and prove he wasn't just a name. And one thing to remember at this point is that he was a national treasure and a household name here in the UK. He had the weight of an entire nation on his shoulders, and 1996 was going to be the year, given that Euro 96 was going to be held in England, Baddiel and Skinner had their football song, you had Oasis and Blur in the charts, and reforms in the Labour Party had resulted in a cultural boom called Cool Britannia. Basically, it was like the last dregs of Thatcherism being kicked out of the House of Commons. And Labour won the election the following year in an epic landslide. And true to form, the England team would lose in the semi-finals on penalties against Germany. All on you now, Damon. Damon knew something that we at the time didn't know. It was his last chance to win a title, and he almost threw it away with Villeneuve beating him in Hungary, then a poor race at Spa where he finished 5th, and then he made a mistake at Monza where he could have sealed the title, but he hit a tyre wall on the apex of the second chicane and was eliminated from the race after a few laps. Villeneuve kept his title hopes alive by beating him at Estoril and then lost his will at Suzuka, meaning that whatever happened, Damon won the title. That was my 6th birthday that happened. But just before the German Grand Prix, an inside source told Andrew Benson, who was then working for Autosport and is now a professional Lewis Hamilton fan, that it was Heinz-Harald faster than Michael in Group C Frentzen that would be signed for 1997. With Villeneuve on a multi-year deal, this meant that Damon would be surplus to requirements, and despite it only being one source in the paddock, Autosport printed it anyway. Front page. Damon fired. As you can imagine, Damon wasn't happy with finding out through the papers that he was going to be dropped, and Frank then called him and said, look, I have to do what's best for the team, and weirdly, Damon was cool with that. Damon's manager had been talking to Williams about a deal for 1997, but it never amounted to anything. The long and short of it, it all came down to money, and Damon would be too expensive. And Frank and Patrick didn't seem as good enough either, because he wasn't as good as Schumacher or Hakkinen, and if anything, Villeneuve was naturally faster than him. Has to be said though that on his day he could be better than Schumacher, but there were too many off days for Frank and Patrick to keep him around. And you also need to factor in that he was on the cusp of turning 36 when he won the world title. And as we all know, he went to Arrows for 1997. They were the only team that would give him a 1-year deal, everybody else wanted 2. And the only reason he joined Arrows is so he could go to McLaren for 1998. Yeah, join Adrian Newey there. But Ron Dennis would only pay him if he won a race, for some odd reason. It was something like $1 million per race win. So instead he went to Jordan for 1998, got his last ever win at Spa, and then retired at the end of 1999. And even now, I'm still a fan. So that's the actual reason Damon left Williams. It's not as cut and dry as he won and Williams sacked him, since he hadn't even won the title when it happened. But if you insist on getting the full story from the horse's mouth, I highly recommend getting his autobiography. It details his life up until the death of Graham and his belief that he had to rebuild the family's reputation by winning the world title, as well as coping with depression and bits and pieces like that. And it also corrects a lot of the myths that you hear surrounding his departure from Williams, like the ones I've debunked right now, I guess. It was all because of the disaster of 1995, and Frank and Patrick made a massive mistake that potentially changed the fate of the team until the early 2000s when they got Montoya and BMW engines. But without Damon getting sacked, we wouldn't have had the ending to 1997. So that's it for this story. If you've enjoyed it, give it one of these, and if you want more, click the subscribe button with the bell on so you get all the latest from this channel. Of course, massive thank you to the people of Patreon for their continued support, and if you want to join them by supporting me at a more personal level, or just join in the Discord fun, then I'll leave all the links to that and all my social media stuff in the description box for you. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. So until then, goodbye.